This is a recording. Welcome to the Locked Tome, the spooky sister channel to the Open Book. To kick off this horror-loving space, I am repurposing some of my older videos, originally published to TOB, which were admittedly a little too horror-centric in nature. We're splitting vibes and splitting skulls over here, so if anything in this video feels a little odd in the editing, that's why. I can't wait to get the channel fully up and running. Thanks for stopping by, and please stick around if you also enjoy all things horror, and if you'd prefer cozy vibes, I will kindly direct you to the Open Book channel instead, where over there I have cookies. End of recording.
Hello humans, my name is Sadie, and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about zombies. It's not hard to tell, I love horror. From classic spooks that make you afraid of the dark to hilariously bad slashers. I watch it all, and I enjoy it all. Mostly. But no matter where you fall on the spectrum of enjoyment, you've no doubt run into zombie movies. The film market is so saturated with zombies, I literally wouldn't believe you if you said you hadn't seen a zombie flick, even if you actively avoid them, because sometimes they creep in on you. It seems like a perfectly ordinary movie, and then bam, the conflict is a man-eating infection. That happens a lot with aliens in movies too. I guess they're just an easy out for an apocalypse. And I'm not just limiting this to the horror genre. Zombies have been spilling into other various kinds of movies like thrillers, action, and even romance. Yes, I'm looking at you, warm bodies. Now, why am I talking about zombies? Well, it's because no matter how sick of them you get, they're a staple. Sometimes I get bored of them and I go on zombie hiatus for a couple months, but then I always come crawling back. I'll probably make a video somewhere down the lines about the different kinds of zombie movies and the fads they go through, but for now, I've got my sights set on one specific abomination, Daybreak. Daybreak is a Netflix show that aired October 24th, 2019. Its score on Rotten Tomatoes is 70% by critics and 66% by audiences, and I'm pretty damn confused about it. How did the critics give it better, and how is its score not more like, I don't know, 30%? I'm going through some tweaks of my reviews on this channel, and Rotten Tomatoes is not doing it for me anymore. I'm just going to start grading things, like school. It's time to teach. Oh, I wrote in the script to get a ruler. I don't have a ruler. This is much less sexy now, I'm sorry. As with all my videos on content that I have more to say than simply acknowledge something or recommend it to you, my rant on Daybreak will be split into two parts. This video will compare Daybreak, which is a terrible zombie thing, to Zombieland, which is the potentially best zombie thing that has ever happened. The next video will be schooling in how terribly Daybreak wrote the world and lessons that we can pull from its trash fire on how to create better characters ourselves. Now, Zombieland aired in 2019, and they released a sequel, Zombieland Double Tap, in 2019, for which I was hyped as fuck. And although it's not as good as the original, it lived up to the expectations Zombieland set. If you, like me, consider Zombieland an instant classic since it came out a decade ago, you're probably wondering why I'm comparing it to Daybreak. It's obviously not fair to hold any other movie to such high standards, right? I'm doing this because Daybreak brought this upon itself. Daybreak thought that it could mimic Zombieland's introduction without putting in more effort. It has drawn upon my critical wrath. However, I will give credit where credit is due. I'm not one of those hyper fans that run around blindly screaming for Szechuan sauce. I didn't hate Daybreak when I started watching it, and unlike 13 Reasons Why, I wasn't under the impression that I was going to. The first episode was solid, and it brought together a lot of what made Zombieland fun. The creators of Daybreak didn't have the wrong idea copying Zombieland at the start of their series. Their veer towards Riverdale, however, was their downfall. I picked up Daybreak because it seemed like it was going to be a Zombieland-inspired TV series, but if it had drawn inspiration from Zombieland in its opening episode, it did not stay true to it as it went along. So, Zombieland and Daybreak open in a similar fashion. Our introduction to the world is voiced over by our protagonist, an outcast in former society that's learned to thrive like others couldn't in the apocalypse. They're generally witty. Zombieland takes a darker tone to the situation, while Daybreak errs on the side of excitement, but nevertheless we have a smart, stays in his lane, and survives protagonist to root for. The formula is not exact, but Daybreak takes all the essential elements of Zombieland and finds a way to add them in. We get flashbacks of the main character shortly before the apocalypse to get an understanding of who they were in context to how they've been affected. The main character gets a more badass male companion. When given the choice to do the right thing, the main character chooses to trust a younger female, assuming she's a damsel in distress, and is surprised to find that she's more of a badass than him too. These are loose comparisons because Daybreak is a series and Zombieland is a movie. You can't, or rather shouldn't, do the same things in the same amount of time. The setup in the first episode of Daybreak, however, gives us a similar structure as Zombieland. We meet our trio with very different but complementing personalities and expect to follow them and our self-aware main character through the difficulties of a zombie apocalypse. Besides the setup, what linked Daybreak to Zombieland so instantly in my mind was the type of humor. Both media focused on finding a funniness in the absurdity of living in a wasteland. In Zombieland, Columbus's first fight is an awkward struggle against a hot girl in his apartment building. He struggles to achieve the mentality needed to take her down and fumbles in an effort of it, basically wrecking his apartment in an attempt to kill her as politely as possible. In Daybreak, the first fight we see with Josh is an attempted rescue mission, where he's pitted against some golf club kids and his sword gets stuck in his opponent's hand on the first swing. He's trying to cut off his finger and have it look rad, but he's too clumsy on the execution. By the end of the episode, Josh also loses his sword when it gets stuck in a zombie and it runs away, so he's a bit bummed about that. As I mentioned, despite the technical seriousness of the situations, through the lens of our endearing outcast, we find it funny. There are clear violent consequences, but they're downplayed by the absurdity of the occasion and the poor execution of a regular human forced into it. This is where I stick my finger up and go, but, there needs to be a balance to this kind of comedy. The humor comes from us being grounded and witnessing the absurd reality. Zombieland does not break from its sense of realism, but within the second episode of Daybreak, it does. The funny, absurd reality we're introduced to deteriorates into a nonsense reality, which is neither compelling nor amusing. I am not going to get into characters in this video. If you'd like a breakdown of the biggest flaws in Daybreak, check out my next video. To short form it, Zombieland introduces simple characters and expands on them in small, subtle ways that don't rewrite them. It just makes them better. Daybreak has its characters doing 360 no-scopes of logic every other episode, so it's impossible to care about them. And if you can't find enjoyment in the characters, you're left with the world and premise. I don't have a problem with Daybreak taking a more exaggerated stance on resource consumption, considering it's a show about teenagers in a post-apocalypse that split their town into high school clique territories. I do have a problem with them disregarding every aspect of human logic that comes with sustaining in a wasteland. Zombieland does a great job of addressing resources, although, funnily enough, both worlds are represented as still having running electricity no matter how many months have gone by since the initial disaster. Zombieland follows a moving troupe. They have a destination and they're on the go. Because of this, they scavenge. They take what they need at what locations they can get it, from food to cars, gas, and guns. It's all just a take and go. And an iconic trait of Tallahassee is that he likes to let off steam by destroying things. This doesn't come off as wasteful, however, because there's always a close alternative, or the item of his wrath has no real value. Since they're constantly moving, there's no value to them in a convenience store on a highway that they will never come back to, or to anyone else because there's so few humans left compared to the product left in the world. Daybreak has a problem in this aspect because it's the exact opposite. The teens in the show are settling into their town and they have territories. We are never shown that they have made any attempt to leave the town or had outsiders enter. Josh is genuinely surprised to find out that everyone is still playing Call of Duty and Overwatch with kids around the world because many of them assumed that this was it. These are all the people that are left. And in that mentality, we see absolutely no rationality for any of the characters involved. They do not cache resources or prepare for impending shortages aside from Josh, who does so in his apartment. They never go back to after the first episode until the end of the season. One of the factions, the Glamour Squad, or whatever they're called, are a cult of toxic femininity that hosts an entrance trial, the first round of which is a bouquet of inedible poisoned food. Not only is the test stupid, it's a waste. You could excuse the show for, say, only using non-perishables in the situations they can be reused for the banquet multiple times, but the banquet includes shrimp and fresh meat. These characters are literally throwing this shit away with no means of getting more once it's gone, and it's a wonder they still have food at the start of the show to begin with. I'm not even going to ask how in the last episode there's still fresh fruit. That is nitpicking though, and where Daybreak completely dropped the ball was when it forgot it was a show based on the premise of zombies. For reasons, a nuclear blast vaporized most of the adults, and left the rest zombified. What made the first episode of Daybreak good and got me genuinely intrigued to see where it went, despite the over-the-top teen tropes, was that it heavily focused on zombies as an inherent factor of the world. It was inventive when Josh and his friends threw blood at their enemies to draw in zombies and disperse the attackers so they could escape. They weaponized the zombies, and that was cool. As each episode passed, however, zombies became less and less visible as the show focused more and more on character relationships. And this change is not inherently bad. We saw it in The Walking Dead. When the seasons went on, the threat of zombies remained a lingering danger, but the narrative was about social hierarchies that formed in the apocalypse's aftermath. The characters explored in Daybreak, however, are terrible and uninspiring. Zombies in Daybreak become a bit of a plot hole in that sense, not just because they lost all relevance to the story, but because they'd show up only when the plot needed them to. They become inconsequential, whereas in the first episode, they've been presented as a constant deadly factor. Then again, it's hard to care about zombies as a threat when their main existence in the show is an amusing means for a demented dictator jock to throw people into a pit of them, and human life in the show has no value. Zombies show up in the end episode in a horde drawn in again by one of Josh's plans, but this time they're more of a distraction, while we're only supposed to be worried about the good guys taking down the sentient, manipulative zombie principal trying to nuke everyone left alive in the town that doesn't worship him. Because fuck adults, right? They're the zombies, they're the reasons the world blew up, and that's all we should take away from this. Did I mention there are huge mutated animals in Daybreak too? In the second to last episode, a human-sized pug takes down and kills a golf kid a couple 100 feet from Josh, who's holding a bleeding friend. It comes in, takes down that kid, and nothing. In plain sight. Josh doesn't have to address the beast, it's not going to come after him. I guess the zombies aren't going to instantly swarm him either, although he is covered in blood, because the plot doesn't have time for that. Josh merrily strolls away from the situation. That's what I'm talking about, in that Daybreak forgets that it's a zombie show. It introduced them as a factor so they had something to play with, not to set any form of consistency. Zombieland never forgets about zombies. Zombies are ever present. They weigh in on every decision Columbus makes. Regardless of zombies constantly moving the plot forward, the climax of both Zombieland movies revolve around the overwhelming presence of zombies. Daybreak did that in their first episode to draw me in, and then forgot about them and wrote a teen drama instead. In conclusion, Daybreak was a huge disappointment. Even more so because it set itself up as a Zombieland knockoff with its self-aware, awkward protagonist, characteristic badass entourage, and thoughtful use of premise, which it completely throws out the window. Where Daybreak has an advantage to create a deeper world and characters because it's a show and has 10 times the runtime, it does less than Zombieland in every way. I would happily watch Zombieland, the original, not even including Double Tap, on repeat for the duration of Daybreak's whole season, than sit through each of their poorly written episodes. So if you're planning on watching it, save yourself the trouble. Quality over quantity. So that's the end of my rant. Comment below if you've seen either Daybreak or Zombieland, or both. Give me your thoughts. If you enjoy my content, like and subscribe. My next video will be a deconstruction of Daybreak's poor writing, so keep an eye out for that. I create videos on literature and film every Tuesday